Hello, everybody, and welcome to Breast Cancer Now's Facebook Live session this evening. Hope you are all doing okay and keeping it warm. It's a little bit chillier this evening than it has been before. I'm Catherine. I'm one of the clinical nurse specialists for Breast Cancer Now. So Breast Cancer Now, the research and support charity, and being one of the nurses, then obviously I sit and deliver an awful lot of support along with my colleagues, of which the Facebook Lives that we're doing is part of that delivery of support as well. We're going to be talking about clinical trials and secondary breast cancer today, this evening. So I'm joined by two people one who is a nurse, so Mel, lead clinical trials nurse from Make Seconds Count, and then also Adele, who has used the Make Seconds Count clinical trials service. So she's been a user of their services, and it's really helpful to have people share their experiences when we're talking about these things, just so that you get a good broad view of the service and what it's like to use that. Just to explain that secondary breast cancer, what the definition of that is that is breast cancer that has spread beyond the breast and the lymph nodes underneath the arm. So it may well have spread to the places like the lungs, the liver, the bones, and the brain, for instance. So just so that we know what we're talking about and what clinical trials we're talking about for the particular condition. So we're not talking about primary or early breast cancer. I just wanted to say a quick mention about our survey, so that we do have a survey that will be there'll be a link to that in the chat underneath this video, so that you can fill in, and we really appreciate your ideas about other topics for these Facebook Lives, so please do take some time to fill that in. And a quick reminder that the chat underneath is public, so anything you post under there, and you are welcome to post comments and questions as we go along this evening, are public. So if there's anything sensitive or you prefer to ask us something privately, then you can contact us, use our helpline, or use our Ask Our Nurses service, or of course here on social media, Facebook, Instagram and X, you can ask us questions on there as well. If there's any questions that are not specifically related to clinical trials, you will still answer those, but I'll probably do your written reply to those. We really want to concentrate on clinical trials and secondary breast cancer tonight. So if you've got any questions about that, please do pop them in the chat, and I can give them to Mel or ask Adele if you've got a question for Adele as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mel to this evening's chat. Hi Mel, nice to see you again. Hi. Thanks for joining us. It's great to have you here, and we really do like talking about clinical trials, and particularly with Make Seconds Count, because you've got a great service. So do you want to introduce people, introduce yourself to people and just let them know about the role that you have at Make Seconds Count?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Catherine's already said, I'm Mel Tolson, and I'm the lead clinical trials nurse with Make Seconds Count. So our charity is all about giving hope back to those who have secondary breast cancer and their families, and really supporting them, everything to do with secondary breast cancer. But obviously the area that I'm focused in is clinical trials. My background is all oncology nursing in many types of solid cancers, but breast cancer is really my main background, which I've been involved in I should say, about 28 years. So lots of experience.
Okay. I had no idea it was that long. Loads and loads of experience, which is all great for the service and great for the people that you support. So I suppose it'd be a good idea to start with just explaining what clinical trials are, because I think an awful lot of people, if you've not been, ill in any way, shape or form, and particularly in cancer, there are loads of trials, but it's something that is quite, sort of mysterious. What is it? What does that do? Is it for me? What can it help me with? Do you want to just give us a basic explanation of what clinical trials are?
Okay, so obviously clinical trials, they're not new. They've been around for decades, and all the treatments that we currently use and give and that are licensed through the NHS treatment or privately, depending on how you get your treatment, these have all these drugs have been through clinical trials before, and it's the only way we can get drugs licensed for use at certain time points in patients' cancer's treatment journeys. And obviously the drugs have to be tested. The whole point of that is not only to see how effective they are, but we need to make sure they're safe to give and that patients can tolerate them. We'll obviously try and work out what the side effects might be. And so it's a way of finding new drugs that are hopefully more superior to what we're already using currently, and hopefully give benefit to patients, especially in the secondary setting when we're trying to obviously not cure their cancer, but treat them as long as we possibly can, and move those treatments forward if we need to. So they're not new, they've been around for decades, but as I say, it's the only way we can move things forward and keep looking for future medication and better medication than what we currently have.
Okay. And you've mentioned quite a few times there about new drugs, but if I'm right, I think sometimes there are trials that using existing drugs.
We'll have drugs that we maybe already use in other types of cancer, but we now want to try it in breast cancer and see what kind of results we get. And that might be combining it with other drugs that we already use. Sometimes we'll have trials where the drugs are maybe given for a completely different health condition altogether. And it might be that there's evidence to suggest that we would benefit using it in cancer trials as well. So sometimes it can be drugs that we have used for other things, or we've known about for a while, but as you said, we're giving it a slightly different way. We're maybe giving it sooner rather than later, and we're maybe giving it in combination with other drugs that we already use. So
Okay.
yeah, absolutely great.
Okay, brilliant. And we've used the term clinical trials, but obviously there is other research that goes on, because there are people that take part in research with regards to side effects of current drugs and well-known drugs, or maybe, sort of the psychological support that they need as well. You're purely really just talking about clinical trials and if needs be, and we'll go on to talk about the service a little bit later on, but if people are trying to match them up to clinical trials that involve drugs, right? Although I suppose you do also tell people about what other things might be involved with trials or research.
Absolutely. So, normally the sorts of things that we're looking into for patients are drug trials. It could be radiotherapy trials as well that might be on the go, especially if they've maybe got a disease that's kind of solitary and might benefit from having a specific type of radiotherapy. If we do know about other kind of add-on trials, or trials that are maybe looking more about psychological impact or fatigue or sleep, all these kind of things, then we can discuss those as well.
Okay.
So it really just depends on what's on the go, but the majority of things that we're searching for tend to be treatment trials. Yes.
Okay. And from a secondary breast cancer point of view, then quite a lot of people assume, if they know about clinical trials, that clinical trials are really when your options have run out of treatment. We know that people can respond pretty well in some circumstances for long periods of time, with their drugs and their treatment, etc. But they will swap from one drug to another. Some people will spend less time on a drug before their cancer progresses and move on to the next one. So everybody is different. But there is this assumption that clinical trials are really only for the end when when those treatment options have run out. But that's not the case, is it?
No, it's not. I always call it my urban myth when I'm discussing it with patients. I'll say it's an urban myth. So yeah, clinical trials are actually for any point in your treatment pathway moving forward. There's clinical trials right from the minute people are diagnosed with secondary breast cancer right through to what I would call end-of-life care, depending on what that looks like for some people. But the trials generally that we're finding are treatment trials. So, it could be that somebody has just been newly diagnosed, and actually there could be a clinical trial right there waiting for them that might be an option for them rather than something on the NHS. But the trials are quite unique and quite clever in that they can kind of slot in between normal treatment pathways on the NHS, and therefore they don't need to be left as a kind of last resort. There actually could be trials for any line of treatment moving forward if we need to change treatments. Yeah.
Okay, and I think Adele's going to talk about that, but just before I bring Adele in, which I will do in a moment, then really can you explain sort of different phases of trials? Because that's the other thing that sometimes people hear of, the different sort of phase of trials, and they wonder sort of what difference that makes to them. So if you could give us a brief outline of the phases, I think that would be helpful. And then we'll talk to Adele.
So they tend to go from phase 1 up to phase 3. And at each phase, it's really about the drug's own journey and knowing more about the drug as it goes through the phases. So phase 1, for example, might not necessarily just be patients with secondary breast cancer. It could be a range of different types of cancer. So in phase one, the drug's usually never been given to human beings before. It's maybe had some work done in a lab type setting, but it's the first time we've tried it on patients. And so we don't know the side effects yet. We don't know what the dose of this drug's going to be. And so phase one's all about trying to find that out. What are the side effects? What is the dose going to be moving forward? And so we start with very small doses of this drug and slowly increase those doses until they find a dose that they feel everyone can tolerate. So phase one, lots of monitoring going on, making sure everybody's okay and tolerating the drug. These sorts of trials generally are not ran at small hospitals because they just don't have the experience.
Okay.
Small district general hospital maybe wouldn't have the experience with this type of trial. So it's usually the bigger city centre uni type hospitals. So we're trying to work out the dose. We're trying to work out what cancer cells this drug's going to work best on. Is it breast? Is it bowel, bladder, lung, prostate, whatever? And make sure that the patient is safe and that everybody is tolerating it. So lots of monitoring there, which can sometimes be slightly scary for patients. But as I say, all within good hands, usually kind of a one-to-one nurse type approach to patient and lots of monitoring to make sure everybody's feeling okay. If that drug is then approved successfully in that phase one area where we can see it's had benefit for whichever type of cancer cells, we would then move the drug into phase two. So a brand new study this time.
Okay.
And it might just be we want patients now with a specific type of breast cancer. And again, we probably have worked out the dose because we've done that at phase one. So now we're really looking at this drug, looking at, again, side effect profiling. We might bring in quality of life here as well.
Okay.
No point finding fantastic drugs if everybody's, floored for 3 weeks. We want to make sure people can still do all the things that they want to do. So we bring that element sometimes in as well. And sometimes the phase two is more about taking the drug by itself and maybe directly comparing it with the drug and combining it with something else. So just bringing everything on a little bit further. If that all goes fantastic and we've got lots of data and evidence to suggest that this drug is going to be kind of useful or proving its use, we might then move it into phase three. Drug by this point might have a name. It probably hasn't got a name at phase one or phase two, depending on what we're looking at. But when we come to phase three, we could have hundreds or thousands of patients in this study now. So it could be a big UK-wide or worldwide study so that we can now generalise the results. And it might be we've got this new drug in combination with something, and we're going to directly compare it to maybe an older chemotherapy regime or some older medication that we've already been using. So that's just a kind of a brief way of putting it. Obviously, there's lots of kind of There's lots of kind of facets to that, and every trial can be different, and every trial, will have its own criteria and various drugs and combinations in them. But generally, it's the drug kind of working its way through from a kind of unknown named drug through to something that we're going to license and use and hopefully change our standard.
So by the time the sort of masses are involved, or the opportunity for people like Adele, let's say hello to Adele this evening. Hi, Adele. Thanks for joining us. By the time Adele as people like Adele are on the trials, then really we've established the dose, we've established the fact that it's something that is safe to take. It is really just looking at the finer and the minutiae of that and how well that works for certain people. So it's just really helpful to be able to, another myth, I guess, is that, rather than that guinea pig style sort of situation that people sometimes think they're in, that by taking part in the trials that you're able to direct people in the, point them in the right direction for them to join up and take part in, that their safety and that type of thing is already taken care of. So good evening again, Adele. It's really nice to see you. Do you want to tell us about how you got involved in clinical trials? Whether you approached your oncologist. I know quite a few people do ask their oncologist. Sometimes they're welcomed and said, I'll tell you about them, or no, that's not right for you. What happened for you, and what made you think about joining the clinical trial?
Okay, well, I was first diagnosed triple negative breast cancer stage 3
Okay.
at the end of 2020, and I signed up for a trial then.
Right then.
And then when I went for treatment in January, I was told, oh, sorry, you're not stage 3. It's actually spread to your lungs.
Right.
So I was again offered a trial, and she presented me with 2 alternatives. I'm triple negative, but I also have this PDL1,
Okay.
which means that your first line of treatment involves immunotherapy. So I was offered the standard of care or an alternative. Both of them consisted of immunotherapy alongside chemotherapy drugs.
Okay.
They're phase 3, so they've gone through an awful lot of testing before they get to me.
Yeah.
The oncologist did make it clear that by taking a trial, you shouldn't have a worse outcome than you should be treated more badly than if you were on a standard of care. You'd get the same level of care around you. So I took it away and I thought about it, and I decided to go for the trial, I suppose, for one reason, really. I think I was still in shock, but I know I'm stage 4, therefore I cannot be cured. So therefore there was an element with her reassurance that I wasn't going to be disadvantaged by taking it. There was chemotherapy in there, gemcitabine and carboplatin, which I think are standard treatments anyway for people who have breast cancer.
Yeah.
So there is something in there that will be definitely, well, not definitely, because we're all different, but they are pretty certain will have an impact upon the tumours. And, well, as I said, I didn't really think I had anything to lose and potentially everything to gain from an outcome. But the thing I really know now, having had some time on a standard trial, is the amount of monitoring you get and the direct input from the nurses. And by that I mean we have a named nurse who is there at your your clinic. She's the one, if you've got any issues, will get back to you and got back to you very quickly. And I don't mean to disrespect any of the nurses, and certainly not complain about the care that I've had, but I know when it's more of a team approach, it sometimes takes longer to develop a relationship, and sometimes takes longer for people to come back. I don't know if it's also worth me saying, because I know Mel talked about the very early stage trials where you're the first to have them. I'm actually at the Christie, because that was a phase 3, but I then went on to what was a first in human trial as well.
Right.
So they're very proactive at coming to me with the trials.
Okay. And you've been on a couple now, and you're still on a trial. And how long have you been on the trial for?
I've been on this trial for 18 months.
Okay. Wow.
The first trial, phase 3, I was on for 18 months. The second one, which was that early stage, I was on for about 4 or 5 months, and it didn't work at all.
Okay.
And then I went on to a standard of care, because in my mind, I'd had at least 6 months when it wasn't working. And then I did not feel comfortable about accepting the trial. I wanted as much as possible, certainty around what was likely to happen. So I went on to capecitabine. I was on that for 6 months. And when that failed, I went on to this phase 1 trial that I've been on for 18 months.
Okay.
I feel I've undoubtedly been on the trials longer than on the standard of care. And I've actually felt much healthier. Capecitabine did not agree with me.
Right.
But the trials have been, once they got rid of the gemcitabine and carboplatin in the first one, I felt I had more energy. It's me. I felt like I've got me back.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, isn't it? You know, when we've been talking about the length of life and trying to sort of keep the cancer under control, but also quality of life is a big thing as well. So, you know, Mel did mention that there are quality of life aspects to monitoring you and collecting that information and collecting that data. But from an individual's point of view, then clearly, you know, the trials have been of a really great benefit to you. You've talked about the monitoring and that sort of relationship with nurses. Are there other benefits? I mean, anything else that you would want to say with regards to benefits that you feel? And actually, opposite, you know, sort of the conversely to that, is there anything that you would see at the moment as a disadvantage? Clearly, the fact that you've been on the trial for 18 months is a brilliant news and a great advantage. So it would take an awful lot to outweigh that. But anything that you think that people might want to know about with regards to disadvantages that you'd think, oh, that's a bit of a niggle, but obviously things are weighted in the positives for you.
This is a real niggle. The Christie is an hour up the road from me, and I always have to be there at 8:00.
Okay.
And sometimes when you're starting trials and you have to go quite frequently, that is just tiring.
Yeah.
I think another thing that other people might want to be aware of is, like I think Mel said, some of the smaller hospitals can't offer some of the things that the big hospitals can offer. So I think sometimes the travelling can, it can get you down. But I also know from, my own trial and other people I talk to who travel, because it's a trial, you can be funded in terms of, getting a taxi there if you find it too draining, or staying overnight if you've got a long way to come. So I think that's something that lots of people would perhaps want to focus, might sort of, have an impact on what their decision is. And the only personal drawback that I try desperately not to think about is I had 18 months on that very first trial, the immunotherapy and when I hear about ladies who've had, say, 10 years, not 10 years, if only for triple negative, but say have had 2 years on the standard line, sometimes I think, oh, did I make the right decision? But then I have to tell myself, you made the best decision on the evidence that was available. And there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that says if you'd have taken the other path, you'd have had 2 years on it. It doesn't work like that.
No.
And also on the plus side, because I took that path, other things have opened up for me. And these trials aren't always open. And if I'd have stayed longer on something, would I have got a good 18 months on the one I'm on now? So if you go down that line, stop it. You get nothing from it. But that is very, very occasionally I think about that. Oh, and sorry, the other thing that I think can begin to play on your mind is this trial in particular took an awful lot of time to get on. There's a lot of administration.
Right.
Sometimes there's biopsies that have to be taken,
Okay.
have to go to someone and have something verified. So all that administration, if you like, can take time. And I think I was off treatment for 4 months.
Okay.
And getting very agitated. And I'd made an agreement with the local oncologist that if I didn't start in 3 weeks' time, I'd just go on to ordinary treatment. And on the Friday afternoon, I was due to start treatment at 4:00. I got a phone call at midday to say, we've found a trial for you.
Okay.
And I was like, well, what do you do? Unfortunately, I have promised myself I will always at least consider the trial if it's appropriate. But I recognise that period of waiting
is difficult.
Play very heavily on your mind.
Yeah,
have
definitely.
I made the right decision again?
Yeah, and I guess for what people, for the things that we've said is a benefit, the monitoring, etc., can also be a disadvantage to people as well. And those are the sorts of things that you cover, Mel, through the service. So it'd be helpful for you to tell us a little bit about the clinical trial service, maybe at this point, and talk about the benefits and maybe the drawbacks that you talk to people about when you're giving them information about, the trial service itself, or you explain what the trial service is and what it delivers to people and the information you give them.
Okay, so the trial service, so we've been on the go about 4 years, this service. It's free and you can use us as many times as you want moving forward. So it's not a one-stop shop. Adele, I think, has used the service at least 2 or 3 times. I think it's 3. So what we do is you would book yourself an appointment through our website, and we can give you links to show you how to do that.
We'll be putting those up underneath the video here.
So you literally go into our website at Make Seconds Count, go into the clinical trials area, and there'll be a booking form that you can fill in. Just ask for some background details really about yourself, your phone number, your email, which consultant you're under, that kind of thing, which hospital you have treatment at. Lots of questions about the treatment you've had already, that kind of idea. And then what happens is once you fill that in, you then book an appointment that's a date and a time that suits you. So there's appointments Monday to Friday at various times of the day, depending if you work or have other commitments. And then I would phone you at that on that date and time. We go through the paperwork again just to make sure everything's right. I ask you some more questions. Just about general health and other medications and things you might be on. And then we have a chat about clinical trials. So sometimes people have already heard myself speak on something like this, or they've maybe been at an event where they've heard about clinical trials. So we just go with the flow. Whatever the patient or the person needs, that's how we kind of go. So some patients will have lots of knowledge about trials. Others are starting right from scratch. And regardless of where you're at, we go over trials, what they are, what they're not, the phases that we've talked about, dispelling some of those myths that we've talked about, and looking at how you would enroll or register for a trial, because obviously there has to be a consent process as well. We look at the other sort of terminology around clinical trials, like randomization, placebo, which I can go into if you wish. So placebo is normally a word that people get a little bit worried about.
Yeah, definitely.
They'll know that it means that the drug, whether it be a tablet or a bag of fluid, has got no active ingredient in it. So it's not going to do anything to any cancer cells. There's nothing in it that's going to treat the cancer. So lots of patients get very worried that if they go into a clinical trial, they're only going to get a placebo. Now, I always tell the patients that it would be unethical in the secondary breast cancer setting to have you in a trial where all you're on is a placebo, because that means you're getting no treatment. That would be unethical, it would be unfair. We would not do that. So if there is placebos involved in secondary breast cancer trials, and to be honest, I don't see a lot of placebo trials involved, you would still always be on some kind of other active treatment, whether that be chemotherapy or other targeted treatment, but you would always be on some form of treatment as well as potentially the placebo or the real drug, depending on how it's played out.
Okay.
So you'll always be treatment within clinical trials. You would never just be on a placebo by itself. So we discuss all that on the call. If the person wants a trial search done, I would explain how that would happen. So we have databases that Make Seconds Count have permission to use. We don't own the databases, but we use them to search for clinical trials out there. We update our paperwork and our registry and all our stuff at our end. We do that once a week to make sure we're as accurate as we can be. But obviously, because we don't own these databases, we have to rely on the people and the organisations that own and run them to update these databases when they can.
Sure. And on your registry, we'll put a link to the registry as well so people can have a look at that, which is helpful. I know you're sort of looking at updating it, and it is really hard work to keep up to that because things are changing all the time, but it's helpfully sort of sectioned into triple negative, for instance, which, relates to Adele, but also HER2 positive and hormone receptor positive and those sorts of things, isn't there?
Correct. So it's all chunked into potentially the pathology diagnosis that patients would have. So we do a search for the patient if they want it done. Obviously, if they've got results coming up, and so they're kind of needing to know quite quickly what their search might look like, we try and do that within a few days. If they're on their treatment and they're nice and stable and they've just had scans that have said everything's stable, and there's not so much of an urgent demand to have the search, then we usually do it within a week or two, ideally. So the patients are getting the information back quickly. They're not having to wait weeks and weeks and weeks to find out what their search results would be. So we email that through to them as attachments, and then the idea is that at some point that they feel they've got the right time to go along and speak to their oncologist, they would discuss the trial search with their oncologist. So Make Seconds Count don't put you forward for the trial or refer you for the trial or put you into the trial. It needs to be a referral that would come from your oncologist. So it needs to be a discussion that you have with your oncologist saying, here's a search, we're needing to change treatment. What do you think about these? Would any of these suit me? And take it from there. Sometimes it might be that the time you come to that kind of chat, some of the trials might be closed to recruitment because obviously, as Adele's already said, once they get the number of patients they want into that trial, they'll stop recruiting new patients. So they'll still treat and follow up the patients they have in the trial, but they're just not taking any new patients on board. And so sometimes it might be that what we've sent, some of that actually goes out of date quite quickly, depending on how long that trial has been running.
Sure.
So what we suggest to people is if it's over 6 months since they've had a search done, just to come back to us, book back in for a new appointment. We can have a quick chat to see where the patient's at with their treatment and their general health and any other changes to their health. And then we can do a fresh search.
Okay.
Sometimes if it's less than that and they've maybe had a new scan result that showed they've maybe got some progression and the treatment needs to change, they can get back in touch and we can just do a very quick search and just check that there's nothing new or nothing's closed or changed.
Okay.
That's essentially it. And that kind of appointment takes about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour.
All right. And I'm guessing that there are some people who have been sort of stable on their treatment, but literally just want to know about trials, because I think it is something that is not necessarily talked about. We talk about treatment, where we're going to move on next and that type of thing. And it doesn't necessarily come up as a sort of standard part of conversation in sort of, those clinic appointments. So it might be handy to sort of ask Adele, really, at what point did you learn about Make Seconds Count and the clinical trial service and sort of, make contact with them? Because you obviously said, when you were first diagnosed, you were offered a trial, but what made you go to Seconds Count? Was it for more information or was it you were trial searching?
I think I was trial searching, but what I found really useful about Make Seconds Count is I think the first couple of times I asked them just to look in the sort of like Greater Manchester, Merseyside area, because that's really easy for me to get to. And it's really good in terms of these are the possibilities. And then sometimes you need more, more digging if you've got the right protein and stuff that you wouldn't necessarily know. And I found that through, I think, general conversations in a Facebook group somewhere about trials. And I thought, well, I do trust my oncologist, but I just wanted to know that they had everything. And then the most recent time I spoke to them, which is probably only about 4 or so months ago, it's just, actually, the Christie don't know everything. I'm sure they have good links, but Make Second Count have this database that they could perhaps point me towards something else if it's needed, and then get the referral to the oncologist, from the oncologist to the trial, because as Mel said, everything changes. You can't expect them to be on top of everything the whole time, really.
Exactly.
So it's a combination, really, of Facebook groups promoting your service and understanding that, yeah, not everything is in one place and it does change quickly.
Yeah. And I think for me as a nurse, it's just that whole information giving service to help people make their minds up as to whether it's relevant then or whether it's relevant in the future. Then there's an informed sort of decision making that, it may be that, and I don't know how many times this happens. Maybe you don't know this, Mel, but, sometimes people will listen to the information that says, that explains everything I need to know, but actually a trial is not something that I would want to. And that's as much a success in the sense of giving people information to make a decision as it is the other way round, where you can then take people forward, be that in months, years to come, to say, we can help you find a trial to join. So it sort of is really a broad sort of spectrum of people that would get benefit from your service. And as Adele said, rather than just looking locally or regionally, then you've obviously got the whole sort of the UK to be able to have a look at and say to people, well, there is this trial, but it is in London if you're in Manchester. And some people are actually very happy to sort of do that if it means accessing the trial. Plus, as you highlighted earlier, Adele, some of the companies will actually fund your travel, etc. So, it's taking all those things into consideration as well. So, those sorts of things are really helpful. We've got a comment from Rachel. It's not a question. We've not had lots of questions at all. But Rachel said, my mum did a clinical trial of tamoxifen 17 years ago. She said, I sadly lost it to secondary breast cancer, but it helped me, with my breast cancer, and I'm now 3 years clear. We both had HER2. Only difference I've had to have is radiotherapy. And I think, that sort of looking back to people having done things before and been parts of trials have meant that the standards treatments, I think you mentioned that earlier, Mel, is that the things that we're using today to help treat people with secondary breast cancer, wouldn't be here if it weren't for the people that have gone before. So it is contributing to the future as well as giving yourself every benefit, of doing that as well. So I just wondered if there was anything else, we've talked before about the fact that as nurses, we sort of sit here and say, so there's this service, come and listen to us, we'll give you the information. But I'm just wondering if there's any top tips, Adele, that you would want to pass over to people to think about, or, just thinking about clinical trials and just maybe dispel any other myths, or just encourage people just to know more about trials, whether that means that they do ultimately join a trial in the future, or whether it is that they make the decision not to do that. What would you say to somebody that was considering that, or, encouraging them to think about trials?
First and foremost, I'd say, always consider them. It's a possibility of an additional line. You will be looked after without a shadow of a doubt. And I think we've discussed a couple of times, they're not going to give you a placebo at stage 4. They can't. They will give you everything. I've had, as you were talking, I was making a note. Every time I've had a trial, I've had something with it that has been approved. So they do look after you. I mean, the trial I'm on at the moment, one of the arms is to give the trial drug on its own, and the consultant won't allow it. He insists that you have something else with it. So there's always that looking out for you. I think the level of care has always been fantastic, but I think you get that anywhere, to be fair. And what I really value is, I don't know how to put it other than the information that you get. For me, it's knowledge, and knowledge is very powerful. So they're going to take you through it. They're going to explain what it does and what the potential side effects are. And I just feel really comfortable in trying to understand what and why. But my top tip is, don't be scared. Asking, can you go on a trial, costs. I was going to say costs nothing, but I appreciate some people sometimes find it hard to ask the question.
Yeah.
But nobody is going to be insulted by you asking a question, I don't think. And then just take it from there. Perhaps this is still a point where you can talk to make seconds count about it. I don't know, to try and get more information. But it's just always ask. It's not going to be wasted. I mean, if you say no, you say no. And also, don't be pressured into a trial. I've said that
Yeah.
I consider it to be an additional line of treatment, but I know through my own cancer treatment became a point when it was like, no, none of that for me. I want to have something that you think will work better or has a better chance of succeeding. Yeah, they'd be
Okay.
my top ones.
Brilliant. Okay. And I think, just getting that information and not being scared to ask. And sometimes I know we speak to people on the helpline who say, oh, I've asked, but they've sort of said, oh, not just now, not just now. And that's where the service comes in, the clinical trial service comes in, it's just that availability of information, neutral information. Nobody's pressuring you to join anything. Nobody's saying, no, you don't need to know about this. It is that, sort of that ability to be able to get that information. Just one thing that has come to mind, and I think you did talk about it, and I think, Adele, you've talked about it certainly, because you've had trials sort of earlier on, and maybe, not sort of you've got other standard treatments that if you need them in the future. But I think a lot of people these days, with more and more drugs in the standard sort of of care, is, does taking part in a trial mean that you can't have some of those other standards of drugs sort of later down the line? Is that becoming more complicated as things go on, Mel, or am I overthinking things? Because I think it is something that some people might worry about, that if they go down one line with the trial, it might mean that they can't have something else further down the line. And I guess that's what you were touching on as well, whether you're wondering yes or no, sort of, Adele, did I do that right? Did I sort of, cut off one sort of pathway for me to go down? I know we don't always know that. I know that medical evidence, changes, and individual circumstances and biology of the cancer changes. Actually, the more people are on treatment and the longer, you're having that treatment. But is that something that comes up in conversations with people, and they ask about whether that will interfere with that sort of standard sort of lines of treatment that we know exist?
Yeah, I mean, it does come up. And I think, it is difficult because the trials are all so varied and so unique. Some trials will ask for you to have had more of the standard lines of treatment potentially before you would be eligible for that specific trial. So they might want you've already to had a certain type of chemotherapy drug or a certain type of hormonal drug, etc. So until you've had some of those normal standard lines, you might not be eligible anyway. Other trials might say as long as you've had one sort of standard line of treatment, you're eligible. It just really depends. Ideally, the trial should not be impinging on future treatment. They're usually might be combining with something that actually, had you not gone into the trial in the first place, that is what you're about to get. So they're all very different, but usually they will add lineage to the treatments moving forward rather than taking lines away.
Okay, all right. I think that's another helpful thing to know, because I think it is another thing that people do talk about and are worried and might help, impact on their decision making. So, it's helpful to have those urban myths sort of, put to one side.
I think if you're getting to the point in your own treatment lineage where you're actually starting to exhaust all NHS treatment options, or you're not far off that is probably more when the phase 1 trials would come into play, because you've had all the other treatments already that might now be getting compared to something else in a trial. So, we can't backtrack and cap you into a trial where there's something new, but equally the other treatment within the trial, you've maybe already had that. So we're not going to double that up. We're not going to give you that again. So sometimes there will get to a point where naturally we might have to start thinking about these more general trials, like the phase 1 trials, that may not be specific to triple negative. They might want triple negative and prostate cancer, lung, bowel, bladder, ovarian, whatever. so once you get to that stage, I guess there is, you can sort of, that will never hinder you, as long as you're
Yeah.
being treated in
Okay.
that trial. But yes, some of the trials will say you must have this already. So if you've not had it, you're not suitable for that trial yet. And that's probably to allow for that scenario not to happen, Catherine, so that we're not overstepping any kind of
Yeah.
normal NHS treatment. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's so brilliant to have the service there. Breast Cancer Now, I get that out there as much as I can with a lot of the services. So it's great to have that service there and to be able to signpost people too. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining me this evening to talk that. We haven't had any questions, but that's fine. I think we've covered loads and loads of stuff, and I hope people have found from the service that you provide, but it's really helpful to have your sort of insight as a patient, Adele. So thank you so much for your input this evening. If anybody's got any other questions they do want to ask this evening, then pop them in the chat. If you're watching retrospectively, you can catch up on these on our Facebook page for a little while, but they don't stay on forever. So if you can't find them, I think we're going to be posting the YouTube channel link there as well, and then you can find both this and any other of the Facebook lives that we've done in the past there, in the recent past, for you to be able to catch up on. But it was great to talk about clinical trials. It's something that we need to keep talking about. I'm so glad that you found clinical trials, Adele. It obviously has made a big difference for you, and it's great to get the encouragement from you as a patient to everybody else out there. If anybody wants to talk to us about anything with clinical trials, we quite often do, well, more often than not, signpost to Make Seconds Count for further information. But our helpline's open tomorrow, 9 till 4, and we're on 0808 800 6000. But you can contact us through our Ask Our Nurses service on the website or on our forums, or also obviously here on social media as well. But I'm going to say good night to both of you, and thank you so much for your input. It's really valued, and I wish you all the best within the service, and long may your trial continue to work, Adele. Wishing you all the very best, and we'll speak again hopefully in the not too distant future. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.